Is awakening waking up to the big self? This video idea came from a question somebody asked on my video. And I'll read the question briefly because it's actually a really good one. It's an interesting exploration, and there's some very important points to make here. So first of all, comes from 777 Morgana. The question is, so is awakening, or Kensho, what is commonly referred to as self-realization? Not the big self, as in God, as in Autobiography of a Yogi, but the small self, higher self, soul. Please, these terms are so confusing. I know at this point, after awakening, that maps and defining terms as meaningless, this all happens by itself, but it would help me discuss where I am with esoteric teachers. Okay. Well, first of all, I'll start with the low-hanging fruit first. It's your business what you discuss and don't discuss, but if you're trying to tell people where you are in regards to their own esoteric teachings, it may not be as fruitful as you think. Like, you may find a lot of stickiness in those types of conversations, but do what you will. That'd be like the least interesting thing for me to do, would be to talk about my own realization with teachers of different traditions, or whatever, unless they really genuinely want to know and they ask me. But otherwise, man, that can get real sticky real quick. Anyway, so that was the low-hanging fruit. When you asked the question here, you said, is awakening what is commonly referred to as self-realization? And then you said, not the big self, as in Autobiography of a Yogi, but the small self, higher self, etc. So first of all, I don't know what is commonly referred to as self-realization. It really depends who uses that terminology. I don't usually use that terminology, but if you're talking about it in terms of like traditional Advaita Vedanta, Ramana Maharishi, and so forth, awakening, Kensho, is essentially waking up to the big self. And yes, the big self, as in Autobiography of a Yogi, for sure. The small self, higher self, soul, those are probably much more conceptual, maybe a little bit of like terms you might find in, I don't know, New Age type stuff or whatever. But no, this is awakening to the I am sense, is one way of saying it. Now, as I've said before, not everyone perceives it as the I am sense, but it is a very obvious and fundamental transformation in identity. Now, some people do wake up and it feels like I am, right? It can even feel like I am everything, I am everywhere. That will be seamless with the experience of being with a capital B, self with a capital S. What Yogananda talks about, what Ramana Maharishi talks about, they are all the same thing. The self with a capital S, where Atman and Brahman are one, and so forth, right? This will have the initial awakening will have some variation in the depth and clarity of that, but that is exactly what you're waking up to. So the distinction you made is actually more from the standpoint, I think, of not awake versus awake, right? Awake is awake to the big self, God, and so forth, right? You'll experience often, if you're really oriented to the idea of God, you'll often experience God as everything. God is this, and this is everything, and I is everything, and I am God, and God as I, and being as I, and I as being, and there's just seamlessness. Now, you may not want to, or you may not be tempted in that experience, in that realization, to equate all these terms or even speak these terms at all, but they're reasonably interchangeable in my experience. So, and having encountered a lot of people who have woken up and describe it in different ways, interestingly, a lot of times it's really just the tradition they came out of. If you came out of an Advaita Vedanta tradition, you may say, oh my God, everything's the self. It's all the self, Whereas if you didn't, you may not be saying that, but you're having the same experience. You're having an experience of seamlessness, of identity as infinity. You may be having experiences of eternity. You may even be having experiences of non-duality, which is kind of like really the edge of where the I am sense can go. And when it starts to essentially disappear, as Nisargadatta said, if you regress properly, the I am sense will disappear. That's exactly what happens. So So in these teachings with the self and self-realization, self with a capital S, I am sense, I am God, I am everything, everything is being, all of it, to me, is really what you wake up to with a Kensho or an awakening. This is why I say it's kind of a big deal in a sense. It's a total restructuring of the experiential matrix that feels like you and reality and the world and so forth. So yeah, that's that. Now, I do find that, how to say this? I want to say it nicely, but I do find that people who are not necessarily deeply realized, but they do come through certain systems, or they do have had some kind of shift, some kind of insight, they may really champion a certain way of saying it, and they may even suggest that that's really enlightenment, that's really realization, or that's really awakening. But this other stuff other people talk about isn't quite it, or something. That usually hits me more as a personality thing, or not necessarily personality, but a cognitive or psychology thing more than anything. That has to do with some of the, I don't know, coping mechanisms that we've built to feel special or to be special or to identify as groups and identify within groups, and competitiveness and all these little sneaky things that sneak in as we wake up more and more. We hopefully become more aware of them, but they do sneak in to people who have woken up and to spiritual groups, and in big ways sometimes, right? So just know you can get some of that. Now, I think the final thing I want to say about this is that it doesn't really matter that much, honestly. What matters is your own experience, your own realization, ultimately, and how you describe your own experience or realization. Doesn't really matter much. What matters is what you live, right? What matters is the realization itself, which doesn't need to be spoken about. The only reason I speak about it is to, if somebody's interested in waking up themselves, is to kind of induce that, if possible, to catalyze that, to reflect something in them that is infinite, without boundary, not subject to time and space, neither born nor dying, right? So that's why I talk about it. I don't talk about it because I want attention for it. I don't talk about it because I care that anybody believes the way I talk about it is right. I don't care about any of that. I just don't. I can easily not talk about any of this stuff. So it's always good to look at your own motivations as far as why would you even talk about this, talk about your experience, your realization, and so forth. And knowing that the moment you talk about it, you're not really clearly talking about it. I can't actually tell you what awakening is. No one can. I can't tell you exactly what enlightenment is, because telling and language and sentence structure does not do the trick. It can't. It's impossible. You have to wake up to it. That's the beauty of this. But somehow the words can suggest things. They can move attention a certain way as an induced response to what you hear. There is a sort of transmission that happens. I mean, that's all clear. It does happen. But it doesn't mean that my descriptions are right or perfect or anything like that. They're descriptions, right? So as I always point out, don't get lost in descriptions and maps and menus. Make sure you're tasting, right? Make sure your realization is clear. Make sure you're going beyond your own boundaries. And almost anything that comes up in the mind, like this concern even, right? Is it this? Is it that? Anything that comes up in the mind, you can trace it to some fixation usually. Like, why do I want to know that? Why do I need to know this? Why do I need to tell anybody about what I'm experiencing? Why do I want to have a certain definition? Why do I want to equate terms? Why, if you look into any of that in yourself, you'll usually find something, right? Oh, there's something in me that wants validation for this, right? Oh, that's not about realization, because realization is just here already. It is just the case. So that feeling of needing validation, what does that grow out of? Oh, it grows out of a sense that I am not enough. Where did I get that from, right? And you can trace it all the way back. And you will ultimately, if you do it properly, you will trace it back to the fundamental misperception that there is someone in there that's separate, suffering, seeking, desiring, full of aversion, all of it. So everything is a guidepost, including these concerns about languaging or traditions or stages. Like, most of the time you can just trace that right back to whatever's in here, right? Find it in your body, see what the sticking point is, see what the motivation is and the agenda and or competing agendas. It's really nice to unpack competing agendas because it shows you a lot about yourself that you often didn't see right before you did that inquiry. So anyway, hopefully that's helpful. And don't think Yogananda isn't more enlightened than you. Just because he wrote a book, I mean, I'm sure he had an awakening at some point for sure. There are certain teachers, certain people who just get a sort of cult following. What makes Yogananda stand out probably a lot was he was one of the first sort of Hindu Advaita Vedanta type people that came to the United States, and then when he kind of wandered around and had an interesting way about the way he propagated the Dharma or that truth, and started some schools and all that sort of thing, right? So yeah, he's prominent in the literature and in the, I don't know, spiritual zeitgeist or whatever for certain reasons, but it doesn't mean he's like super enlightened either. So don't make that mistake. Ramana Maharishi is another one, like obviously enlightened human being, but what makes him so fascinating is more like his life, right? How he lived his life, how he chose to live his life, or didn't choose, but just lived it. So just all I'm really saying, I'm not downplaying anybody's realization or the effect or influence they have, because Ramana has a lot of effect and influence, and so does Yogananda, and so does Eckhart Tolle, and so does Adyashanti. But I'm just saying these are all humans. They had flaws. They're humans. And some people just have a certain knack for teaching, a certain knack for writing books. They're in the right place at the right time, and then they get a kind of cult following and seem to get a little bit more elevated because of that. So don't buy into that. Don't fall for that. You have the ability to be just as realized as Yogananda, if not more. Of course you do, in this lifetime. So go for it. Okay, that's all I got to say.